Okay, let's get started. So, my name is Claude Williams. I am the CEO of Centel, Centelligent Solutions. We specialize in cyber and all things cyber, if you will. So, that's cybersecurity, that's cyber operations. All of that, of course, touches on business continuity, continuity of operations, disaster recovery planning, pandemic planning, emergency response, crisis management, all of those aspects of what you would consider to be BCM, business continuity management. I am a CBCI, which is certified by the Business Continuity Institute out of um, the UK. Um, Here in the US, there's another business continuity um, association, if you will, that certifies. I chose the UK one specifically because a while back, years, almost now a decade ago, they were one of the first ones to come up with certification around business continuity. And I was doing a lot of consulting up in Canada, and of course, the relationship between the UK and Canada. That certification, I'm actually the BCI certification was something they were looking for. I'm also certified as EDRP, which is EC Council's Disaster Recovery Planning, and ECIH, which is also EC Council's, but this is Incident Handling. Business continuity is near and dear to my heart. I think if it was actually um, much more respected as a discipline and function within organizations, that's probably where I'd be. About 4 years ago, I started a cyber firm specifically to, focus on the aspects of cybersecurity to include business continuity for government agencies as well as private industry. So if you want to know more about Centel, you can go to our website, centel.com. If you have questions or want more information on me, you can take a look at my LinkedIn profile. It's LinkedIn and it's Claude LW. With that, what we're going to do here is we're going to go through business continuity management specifically. We're going to give it a little bit of a slant since we're all probably at home right now, having to now kind of what do they call that? Kind of now shelter in place is the term they use, and it's a business continuity term as well, especially when you have crisis management and things like that. But I kind of hate that shelter in place. I'm not 100% sure why that terminology. I know what it means, but why that terminology? But we're all kind of stuck that way. If I'm in Maryland, so they've just recently, as of last night, 8 p.m., indicated that we cannot go out of the house unless it is um, something critical, groceries and things like that. So no more trying to get to the mall and do some quick shopping while no one's there. And we're all sheltering in place right now, and therefore this is a good time to talk about business continuity, specifically around what we're doing to keep our business afloat. How are we going to survive, given that most people are not focused on business? A lot of them are concerned about health, their family members, staying in touch with them, things like that. Meanwhile, business owners like myself and maybe you are also concerned about how do we actually pay our employees? How do we, continue to survive as a business? So this is very germane to what's going on right now. And so as we go through business continuity management, we'll put a pandemic, if you will, slant on it, or really focus on, what we can be doing now, in what we should be doing now from a business continuity perspective, and what we need to plan for similar situations, hopefully that don't happen in our lifetime, but that could happen um, down the line. So we're going to go through this and take a look at what is business continuity, the goals and objectives. That's kind of the why we do it. Components and subcomponents of BC, business continuity, and then the relationship to other assurance business functions. Okay, so this, again, like I mentioned, I would love to be doing business continuity full time, But there's very few, especially small to medium-sized businesses where Centel kind of lives. We kind of service these, small to medium-sized businesses. Very few of them have a business continuity function that's separate and distinct. Most of them will graft in the business continuity concepts into maybe a information technology role or a cybersecurity role, even if they have that. So, um, we need to understand the relationship and how that best fits within the other functions of the business. And if need be, if we cannot have a distinct and separate business continuity function, how do we actually spread that across the other assurance functions? Okay. And we use the term assurance functions here because we're talking about those aspects of the business that keep the business going, but aren't necessarily revenue generators. Okay. So you can think of sales as a revenue generator, marketing, maybe a revenue generator, but your legal department, your compliance department, your IT department, and of course your business continuity cyber departments. These aren't necessarily revenue generating, but they are the assurance, the confidence components that allow you to continue to do the other things, right? The word assurance, if you study CISSP, they define that word assurance as confidence to continue business, if you will. We'll then look at implementing a business continuity management structure within the organization, even if it is spread out amongst different assurance functions. But we do want to talk about the fact that there should be a corporate structure supporting it and policy development around it. High level strategy development, we'll talk about resourcing, and then of course, BC strategy building. The goals and objectives of business continuity is to keep business going, hence the term business continuity. Many years ago, when this actually was an early discipline, and I'm going to go way back to the 1900s, and if you're a young person, you're probably like, oh my God, that's ancient history, right? But yep, when I say 1900s, my kids look at me like I'm crazy. Back in the 1900s, 1920, 1930, we called this business resumption, or business resumption. That means if there was some level of disruption, the term was disruption to the business, how would we be able to resume business? Business continuity became a big term, and then more recently we call it business resiliency, right? Bend but don't break. We can have disruption, but we won't, we won't die as far as a business is concerned, right? We will be able to survive. So business resiliency is a term that you hear about a lot now, but it's all business continuity. The idea here is to keep the business going, to reduce the opportunity for business interruption. That's goal number one. Number one, let's not have any level of disruption, period. So how can we prevent disruption? That is part of business continuity planning. First, to try to prevent disruption. Then, not being naive to think that just because I try to prevent something that it won't happen. So then the next goal is to reduce operational and financial impact of disruption. Operational impact meaning being able to continue to deliver products and services, if not at full capacity, at least at a diminished capacity that allows us to survive, to make enough money to survive. Many of us right now, if we are business owners, that's probably where we are right now. We have disruption to our normal business. We currently have that disruption with this pandemic and this COVID-19. But hopefully, we've been able to reduce the operational impact. We've had some plans. We've sent people home to work. We've provided them with internet access. We've given them laptops and other resources that they can use to continue business, if not at 100% capacity, at least at a diminished capacity that allows us to generate enough revenue, the financial impact, if you will, generate enough revenue to keep the lights on, proverbially, if you will, really to keep things going, to pay salaries, to pay our vendors, to meet contract obligations, that type of thing. And then the third goal of business continuity is to improve the ability to generate revenue during an incident. Again, Revenue is king. We have to generate revenue because out of that, that's where we find our profit, right? But revenue is most important so that we can pay our bills. Even if we're not generating profit today, we need to be able to pay our, whatever we are currently liable for. We got to pay on those things that, that we've already built up, some form of debt for. We've got to pay our employees to keep them working. We may still have to pay for rent. Maybe we don't have rent forgiveness or something like that. So we still got to pay for rent for the facility that we can't even occupy right now. Okay. These are things that had to have been considered as part of the BC before disruption happened. And these are the things that we are now addressing as part of business continuity. Again, goals and objectives are in support of risk, information security, and incident management processes. Obviously, the way that you start this whole function, if you will, within your organization is to understand what the risks are. Where can you suffer disruption and for how long, and what impact does it have on the business? Finally, there are many, many regulatory compliance issues out there that are state level as well as federal level that require that you have a business continuity plan. We actually have companies that we deal with that are under SEC, regulation, and they are required to have a written business continuity plan. Most industries are now saying, think of financial, banking, but you name it, most industries are now requiring that you have some form of business continuity plan. And I can almost guarantee that at the end of this catastrophe, if you will, for business, for most businesses, small, medium, especially, at the end of this, there's going to be more regulation around having a business continuity plan that also speaks to issues of pandemic. So from where BC flows, business continuity flows from specific standards and regulatory requirements. Some standards that are out there that you can, borrow from are like ISO 25999, ISO, the International Standards Organization, or really the International Organization for Standardization. Nevertheless, ISO being the acronym, they built years ago a standard for addressing business continuity within organizations. NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, has a special publication, 800-34. This speaks specifically to government entities when it comes to how they need to be prepared for disruption and for disasters. We're going to borrow from that. And one of the reasons I'm going to borrow from that during this presentation is the fact I am a CISSP, Certified Information System Security Professional. The fact that not only ISC Squared, the folks that do CISSP, but also CompTIA, the folks that do the CompTIA Advanced Security Practitioner and the Security Plus, and other entities, when they talk about business continuity, they kind of borrow from what the U.S. federal government and NIST kind of, put out as parameters around preparing for disruption. In addition, ISO has put out 17799, which today is known as the 27000 series. That speaks towards organizations having business continuity capabilities, but it's not really a standard for business continuity, unlike ISO 25999, which is a business continuity standard. And then, of course, the National Fire Protection Association 1600 standard for disaster, emergency management, and business continuity planning. This is a great standard for the US because it deals with disaster and emergency management. And again, that's very germane to what we're dealing with today. Business continuity management always starts with a policy. Now, with that being said, your policy is a control, and your policy can't be written without understanding what the risks are. So in actuality, BCM should start with some form of risk assessment. Once the risk assessment is done, then you can develop a policy that really is geared towards meeting the risk that you have assessed, if you will, that you have defined, that you now understand. The policy's job is to help you from a strategic perspective understand how to mitigate the risk of disruption. Now, when we talk about cybersecurity or security in general, we talk about three major goals: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But please understand, when you're dealing with business continuity, it's really a focus on the I and the A, not the C, not the confidentiality aspect, but really the integrity and mostly the availability in information. These are all security issues: CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But for business continuity, security is how we protect ourselves from disruption. Primarily the integrity of information during disruption and the availability of information during disruption. So the policy is an answer to the risk assessment. The policy will drive you to conducting what's called a business impact analysis, sometimes called the business impact assessment. I'm going to talk about that a little later, very briefly, but that's a process that you need to go through within your organization to understand disruption, where disruption can happen and what its impact will be. From the BIA results, business impact assessment or business impact analysis, you can then start to develop plans. Okay, we call these BCPs. Please understand, again, this is business continuity management, and some people call it business continuity planning, but in actuality, BCP a lot of times stands for the business continuity plan itself, okay, which is a combination of different plans in most organizations. But plan development, so you're going to develop BCPs. Let me just stop here for a second and just describe this a little bit more. If I were to go to the Best Buy down the street and walk in and say, hey, I want to buy that TV that's on sale right there. And they said to me, well, you know, Mr. Williams, I don't know if you noticed, but when you came through the door didn't open automatically. You had to pull it open. When you got in here, you didn't notice, but all the lights are out and none of the TVs are on. And I might ask, so what does that mean? I want to buy that TV that's on sale. The young person, the clerk there might say, well, we have a power outage. We have a power outage. You didn't notice that, but we have a power outage. I'm not even sure how you got in here, Mr. Williams, but we have a power outage. So I can't sell you that TV. My question to them is, why can't you sell me that TV? And then, and obviously what the young person is trying to tell me is that my cash register doesn't work. Well, I shouldn't even call it a cash register anymore, right? In my day, it was a cash register. And today it's a computer. It's a terminal that will pop the drawer out when you put the right information in, right? And so what the young person is telling me is that because the power's out, my terminal doesn't work, so I cannot process your cell. This is an issue for business continuity. If the power stays out for a period of time, they're going to lose business. They're not going to be able to generate revenue. And at some point, the cost of having people there, the cost of rent, the cost of not making sales, not collecting revenue, will cause that company to go out of business. Business continuity is about continuing business in the face of disruption, regardless of IT. You see, in my day when I worked at Circuit City, you may not even know what that is, folks, but when someone came in and wanted to buy a TV, even if the power was out, we could write a hand ticket. We could still take their money. We could call up the credit card folks and say, hey, I got a credit card here. Give them the number, and they'd give us an approval code over the phone. We weren't relying on a computer to process sales. So business continuity is, how can I continue business even if my IT capabilities aren't there? Where DRP, disaster recovery planning, primarily focuses around losing IT capabilities, okay? losing my email system, losing my internet connectivity, losing my website that might be used for e-commerce. How do I get those systems back up? Because for most folks, a loss of IT capabilities is a disaster. Think about most businesses that rely on IT, to do even the basics of the basic things. That also becomes part of business continuity management. Even though I may be able to continue business by hand tickets, eventually I got to get the IT systems back online, because we rely on that for inventory, for for forecasting and other parts of the business. Then of course we have what's called COOP. This is big in the government, continuity of operations. This is really around facility failure. Just like that power outage, is there another facility we can go to resume business? Is there another facility we can go to bring up our IT systems? That's really what COOP is about. This came about many years ago. Really, I believe Bill Clinton was in office and he signed a presidential directive about making sure that we have COOP plans in place for most government agencies, right? And FEMA took the head on this and tried to make sure that folks understood what a hot site was, what a cold site was, and how they could fail over their IT systems and get people into other facilities in case the primary facility was unusable. That's what COOP is about. Again, this is another type of plan, continuity of operations plan, that would be part of BCM. In addition, today we're talking about pandemics. We're talking about the safety and health of our employees. You got to have a plan for that. It's called occupant emergency plan. How do we deal for the safety of folks? When we say shelter in place, what does that actually look like for our business? So if folks are in our facility, how do we provide for their health and safety? If folks are at home and they work for us, how do we provide for their health and safety? One of the decisions you might have to make, especially during this pandemic, one of the early decisions was, do you ask your employees to travel? Knowing that the possibility of spreading the virus is there. Not only for their safety, but for the safety of the state or the nation, right? Because it is about their safety, obviously, but it also is about, spreading this thing to others. So your employee may get infected, but then they may affect others. So you have to consider, what is the health and safety of my employees and those of my community, because businesses have a responsibility to the community. And they also have a responsibility to government, and recognizing that the government can put certain restrictions like they have on travel. How do I plan for that? And how do I help my employees through that process? And then finally, there are just straight contingency plans that are part of your BCM. Meaning, I expect a hard drive to fail. I expect a laptop perhaps to be hacked to the point of a denial of service. How do I prepare for that, and how do I develop plans for that? Business continuity management deals with all these types of plans and more: emergency response plans, crisis management plans, communication plans. There is a lot to business continuity management, and most organizations aren't even addressing the tip of that iceberg. Obviously, business continuity management has no confidence in their ability to recover from disruption until they actually test the plan. You actually have to test it to see if it's going to work. Think about the pilot that had to land the airplane on the Hudson. That person, what is it, Captain Sully, I believe? That captain certainly knew what the emergency response plan was. He had a manual probably in front of him, and he's going through the emergency response plan. This is an emergency. How do we respond? That's written. I'm sure it's in the cockpit, so he's going through it. But if you're going through it for the first time, man, that's got to be stressful. You're bound to make mistakes. Therefore, there is no confidence in that pilot's ability to actually respond to an emergency situation. And you need that person to be calm. How can they be calm if they're looking at this for the first time? Therefore, any type of business continuity management plan, if you look at the structure as a whole, any facilities, All of that stuff should be tested. And it should be tested in a way that folks, when they're faced with an actual disaster or crisis or catastrophe, they have some level of comfort in knowing, hey, I've been through this, at least from a testing perspective, from a scenario perspective, so I have an idea of what I'm going to do. Testing becomes extremely important. It also drives confidence that you would actually be able to recover from some type of disruption. It also drives awareness. Folks that are tested actually know what they're expected to do, and others that are around them who are looking at what they're doing are aware as well. You also have to drive awareness of the fact that there are preventive mechanisms to disruption, and there are reactive mechanisms to disruption. And we need to make people aware of that. I'm going to go through this slide pretty quickly because we kind of just talked about that on the last slide. That is, BCM has all different types of plans in here: crisis communication plan, continuity of operations, that's COOP, business continuity plans themselves. The CIRP is your cyber incident response plans. This usually has to do with one system, and that system may be being disrupted by denial of service. You've got the information security cyber plan, information security contingency plan, I apologize. That particular plan has to do with just regular faults, like a hard drive crashing. That can happen. Disruption of services to your cloud provider. Then of course you've got DRPs, disaster recovery plans. You've got critical infrastructure protection plans. You've got occupant emergency plans, and all of that has to be thought about from the organization. So business continuity management starts with first understanding what you're trying to accomplish, so project initiation, conducting that BIA. Somewhere in there you're going to do that risk assessment. I say the risk assessment comes first. This is actually coming from NIST 800-34. They say the risk assessment comes second. To be honest, my feeling is what they mean by risk analysis is a little bit different than risk assessment. The risk analysis is really understanding the operational and financial impact to the business. So when you do the business impact analysis, the risk analysis really gets down to the finances, if you will, or the operational impact. Then you're going to want to do something to reduce that risk. Those are preventive controls that you might be able to implement. And from that, you're going to test. As you test, you're going to find issues, so you're going to update the plans, right? And as you update the plans, you're going to test until you get to the point of being comfortable that you're able to recover or reconstitute when you're faced with disruption. Here's the NIST 800-34. Don't even know where 35 came from. NIST 800-34 set 7 steps in developing business continuity management. Develop a contingency planning policy, conduct the BIA, identify your preventive controls, recovery strategies. That's a high level. Do we need another facility on standby? Or will people work from home? That's a high level strategy. It doesn't tell them how to work from home. It doesn't provide for the internet access, doesn't provide for the cloud provider, but it starts to give you an idea, hey, people can work from home. And so what are the things I need to consider now? When you start to consider the high level strategies, you can start to put those into plans of how you actually will execute those strategies. Then of course you'll test it, you'll train personnel, and you'll maintain the plans over time. There are some specific roles and responsibilities. Suffice it to say, if you're a small to medium-sized business, the folks that make decisions, right, your executive and senior management have to be on board with this. They just have to. If you're in a large organization, they have to be on board with this, okay? It's a little harder for executive and senior management to be on board with it, I think, in large organizations, okay? Small organizations, I think today, they're pretty comfortable with saying, you know what, we got to have some business continuity. Based on what's happened over the last few weeks here, I'm sure that it won't be as hard to convince them. But in the past, it was hard for small and medium-sized businesses as well, because they were focused on generating revenue, how to survive, what's the profit margin, how do we get our next customer. So talking to them about BC probably was not on their radar. Executive and senior management of a large company, again, they're thinking about stock and ownership issues and, how do we push things to market? Again, trying to get them focused on BC issues, not so much. Okay. Now, I will say that if you're in a larger organization, chances of actually getting some business continuity traction is going to be better because there are regulatory requirements that say you have to. There are more leaders within the organization of different functions and different processes who will say, well, you know what happens if I don't have access to this system? And they're going to call for some type of continuity planning. So it's really the small to medium-sized businesses, and that's why the SBA right now is providing money for those organizations, because they know they haven't done maybe sufficient business continuity planning. BCP, relationship to risk management. I'm going to quickly go through this, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is that I have to understand what my risks are. And again, I'm specifically looking at integrity and really focused on availability of what I need to conduct my business. What are some of the potential risks to operations? Fire, hurricane, flood, tornado, got to throw in there right now, pandemic, right? Health issues, right? If a bunch of folks get sick, they can't come to work. Even if it's not a pandemic, if it's an epidemic, or even if it's just a bad outbreak of just the flu, you could have lots of folks missing from work, right? If that's the case, how does that impact my business? And how do I plan for that? So I have to look at the risks of different things happening in the environment that can have an impact on disruption. Identify what those real risks are. The two things I need to look at risk are probability and impact. What is the probability of this will happen, and then ultimately what will be the impact? That's risk assessment. Probability times impact. That's risk assessing. From there, I'm going to put controls in place to try to mitigate the chance of disruption and reduce the risk to an acceptable level. The business impact analysis is similar to a risk assessment in that risk assessments, again, look at probability times impact. Where the business impact analysis or business impact assessment, the impact assessment is looking at impact multiplied by time. It's not an issue of probability. If it does happen, I don't know what the probability is, but if it does happen, if there's just an inkling of a chance that it can happen, if there's disruption that results from some risk, if there's disruption, I want to know what its impact is over time. Think about this. Can you live without your phone, your cell phone? Let's just use a cell phone. Can you live without your cell phone for 30 minutes? If it was broken and you didn't have, what about an hour? What about a day? What about a week? What about a month? If you run your business via your cell phone and how long could you live without it before the business wouldn't survive? What about your IT system? What about your cloud services? What about your people? What if people could not come to the office? What about the office itself? What if it burned to the ground? How long would I be able to survive as a business if my office, my building burned to the ground and I had no place? Let's say if I'm a training company for people to come, if I'm a retail store for people to come, how long would my business survive? So what the BIA does is identify those things that are critical to the business. It says systems here, but this could be anything. Personnel, roles, and people who have certain roles. What happens if the VP of IT is unavailable? These could be roles. These could be individual people. These could be facilities. These could be products. What if we couldn't produce this product? These could be vendors. What if this vendor is unable to give me the raw materials that I need or the support that I need? How long would I be able to survive over time, right? Given time. The goal is to see how the company would be impacted by different identified threats to gather quantitative and qualitative information about the impact. This is quantitative, meaning money. How will this financially hurt us? And this is how will it operationally hurt us? This could have to do with brand, with the fact that our brand could take a hit. This could have to do with, people losing confidence in our ability to deliver services, customers walking away from us. The BIA is where you're going to determine what is the maximum tolerable downtime. How long can I go without something? If it's data, how much data could I actually lose? That's called the RPO, Recovery Point Objective. How much data could I lose before it becomes an issue of survival? From my BIA, I'll be able to identify what are some recovery alternatives that I can have at a high level, at a strategic level. And then I'm going to document my results of the BIA and submit to management for approval. This is going to give me a greater understanding of my business, right? And it's also going to get buy-in from leadership to say, you know what, you're right. If these services are disrupted for a certain significant period of time, we're going to be out of business. Here are some examples, and as you think about systems, people, personnel, whatever, you have to say, okay, well, if I can live without it for more than 30 days, it's not really an essential system. If it's something I can live without for maybe about 7 days, maybe that's a normal, dangerous thing for us. But, anything that I can't live without for 24 hours or for a few minutes becomes urgent or critical to recover. And I want to build these categories and understand my business from a disruption perspective. I want to understand what the categories of disruption are. Non-disasters would be something like a device malfunction. Laptop doesn't boot. A disaster might be something that, impacts us on a longer term, right? And a catastrophe, I would tell you right now, we are bordering, well, if we're not already there, catastrophic disruption to businesses. Catastrophic, which indicates many businesses, when this is all said and done, if the government didn't step in or doesn't act fast on what they recently passed to go and help businesses financially, most of these small businesses and medium businesses will not exist come June or July. They just won't. Because we really are at catastrophic levels. Forget the fact that an example is the facilities destroyed. There is major disruption to revenues. There is major disruption in the stock market with the sell-off that's taking place that's impacting businesses. What you want to do here is you want to understand the impact over time. I'm not going to go into all this, but the fact is you want to understand, hey, if we have disruption in this or that, how does that impact profit? How does that impact productivity? How does that increase operational expenses? Which may be true for a lot of businesses right now because people are working from home. They may have had to bought them laptops and other mobile devices. They may have to pay for folks to have internet access, believe it or not. And they may also have to pay for increased cybersecurity. We're urging our customers right now that because people are working from home, they're actually subject to greater attempts at cyber breaches, right? Because they're working from home. They don't have the same type of protections you have at the office. Their home networks are more susceptible and exposed to the bad guys. So operational costs can go up. Give me about 5 more minutes and I'll bring this to a close and see if there are any questions. The results of the BIA are basically to identify critical departments and required resources that will be needed, even if a system crashes or is disrupted. That system has dependencies, let's say, right? So other systems may depend on that one. And if that's the case, that higher tier, that system that was above, that was depending on that foundational system, now both of them are impacted, right? So when you deal with systems or people or functions or products, you got to understand what are the dependencies and what resources do I need when there is disruption to get things back to at least a diminished level of productivity. Okay, you think about it, there are folks now that need Supplies. The supply chain is broken. They may need supplies from China, which they're just not going to get. They may need supplies, or they may need to ship supplies, I apologize, to other organizations in the, near them or across the nation or across the globe. And they may not be able to do that now with a lot of the lockdown and on international travel and those types of things. So the supply chain can be broken. Those are dependencies that we have to consider. We want to identify what the threats and risks are to our systems, our personnel, our supply chain, the impact on the company, the outage time that wouldn't be critical, and then how we might be able to recover, right? Document, present all this to management and get them on your side. Then start to work on your recovery plans. The plans need to be written. This is important. The plans need to be written. The disruption needs to be understood by the individual departments. If you're talking about a small business, maybe not so much. You don't have so many different departments that you have to worry about. Medium-sized business, large business, each one of those organizations. I was just on the phone earlier with one of our clients, and they are they're broken into at least 12, a dozen different departments. Each department has its own systems, so they have to write their own plans. They have to understand what disruption impacts their systems, and then they have to write recovery plans for their own systems. This can't just be IT centric, because accounting may have their own systems. They have to worry about their own personnel, payroll, R&D may have its own supply chain. Okay, so the plan is not written by one individual calling themselves the business continuity guy or gal. It's actually written by the folks in those areas that have to deal with those systems, that personnel, and those processes. The idea of a disaster recovery plan or business continuity plan is to protect parts on all of these services that may become unstable or unusable, I apologize. Priorities. The number one priority in all of these plans, number one priority, is the safety and well-being of people. So never lose that when you're writing a plan, when you're looking at high-level strategic preparedness. The first thing is, how do I provide for the safety of people? The model plan will have all of these phases in it. I'll just quickly go through that. Supporting information. Where do we get this information from? Your BIA is going to feed into that. We wrote these plans to address these issues that were discovered in the BIA. There needs to be a notification and activation part, which has to do with when do we activate this plan? A lot of companies were struggling with this during this pandemic. They were like, okay, maybe this lasts a week. Okay, maybe this lasts 2 weeks. Okay, maybe this lasts 3 weeks. Oh my God, this could last through the summer. So they did not activate their business continuity plans maybe early enough. And part of that business continuity plan might be how we get, finances, how we actually get some funding in the door, right? If you knew that this was going to happen, if you knew that something was brewing in December, which our country probably knew, something was brewing in December, if we all were aware of that, we might say, boy, this might become an actual pandemic. Let us go out and increase our line of credit. Let us go out and get some, guaranteed loans ahead of time to be ready for the possible disruption. But nobody activated their financial business continuity plan aspects because they didn't necessarily see this coming. And then when it did happen, maybe they thought it was going to be done faster. You were going to get through it faster. So when do you activate the plan? When do you move forward on the steps of the plan? You need to have a defined activation trigger. Who to notify, how to do a damage assessment, and then activate the plan. The plan has two other phases. Recovery. How do I get things up to at least a diminished state where I'm generating revenue, where I've got things going on? And then ultimately, while I'm in the recovery phase, maybe I'm also trying to get back to normal. We call this reconstitution. So many of us right now are in the recovery phase, right? Because people are working from home. This is not the way we want to conduct business, not the normal way we conduct business. So we're in the recovery phase. At some point, we'll be told, hey, this thing is subsiding, and businesses will begin to try to return to normal. What does that look like? Well, that should have already been determined before you activated the plan. But I guarantee you there are many businesses right now who are trying to figure out how they restore their normal operations. And what's going to be funny is that people who are working from home aren't going to necessarily want to go back to the office. Okay, they're not. So you got to consider, how do I restore the original operating environment and get back to 100% of my capacity to deliver my services and products? That's called restoration or reconstitution. And I also now have to be aware that it may never go back to the way it was, even though I can get back to those production levels. And at this point, I should be, if I hadn't already planned for restoration and reconstitution, especially the fact that it may take on a different, may take on a kind of a different approach now, because people, hey, I can work from home now. I've got internet access. I understand how to use Zoom and have meetings. What that needs to look like, there has to be a plan around restoration and reconstitution, and many folks are going to write that now. When it's all said and done, you've got to test the plan. You've got to test reconstitution and restoration. How do you even know you can do that? So not only do you have to test the plan of how do I recover, but you also have to test the plans on how to actually reconstitute things back to normal. Okay, you need to consider testing on a regular basis. Most organizations, by regulatory requirement, are must test their plans and show the results of the test at least on an annual basis. The plan will change when you have technological changes, when maybe people change or roles change, when the environment changes like it is today. The environment's changing because of a pandemic, okay? And then, of course, when laws and regulations change, this may require change in your actual plans, which then require testing and drills. Plan maintenance. Keep your plan up to date. Make it part of every business decision. How does this new acquisition, how does this acquisition of this company impact our ability to deliver our products and services? Okay. What happens if this new acquisition suffers some level of disruption? Every time you get a cloud service provider, do you know what their business continuity plan is? Do you know what their SLA is, service level agreement? Need to know these things. It needs to be part of every business decision, because it's going to impact your ability to continue business in the face of disruption. Make sure that everybody's job description has something to do with business continuity. I can help you out on that, but basically, hey, they need to be observing and understanding. If there's disruption to their job function, if they can't do their job, they should understand what impact that has on the business, and then they should understand how their job is either how they depend on others and how others are dependent on them. If you can, make it part of their personnel evaluation to say that, hey, you helped us, uncover, issues of disruption that can impact our business. That's a little harder. Some larger businesses, that makes sense. Report regularly on testing. And then, of course, conduct audits. Make sure folks actually know. Those might be quizzes. Those may be going and looking at folks, going to different departments and looking at their plans, that type of thing. All right, so when it's all said and done, this is my contact information. If you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Centel as an organization is there to support you. We do business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning. We can help you develop a business continuity management function within your organization. Certainly on the cyber side, we can support you as well. But ultimately, if you just need someone to kind of do security awareness or even business continuity awareness, just to come in and talk with you or to talk with your leadership to explain the importance of having prepared for disruption, then we're happy to do that. Happy to do that. So if you've typed in any questions, I'm going to take a quick look and see if there's anything there. Otherwise, I thank you for your time and consideration. I hope this has been helpful to you in some way, and hope to engage you in future webinars on incident response, again, cybersecurity, business continuity, and some of the nuances all around cyber. So thank you so much.